The map made no sense. Oberst Heinrich Weber stood in the dim light of the intelligence bunker 2 hours past midnight on the 4th of August, 1904. Outside, somewhere in the darkness of occupied France, the Wehrmacht was dying. Inside this concrete tomb buried 3 meters beneath a commandeered farmhouse, Weber stared at red pins that told an impossible story. The Americans were not where they were supposed to be. He had been tracking enemy movements for 26 years. Since the last war. Since the trenches and the mud and the West that still haunted his sleep. Since the day he'd watched an entire generation disappear into artillery barrages that turned the Somme into a graveyard. He understood the physics of logistics, the mathematics of supply lines, the inevitable slownesses of large formations grinding across countryside. This was different. Weber's finger traced the pins on the map. Each one represented a confirmed sighting. Each one told him something impossible. The Americans were moving too fast. Not just fast for an army of their size, fast for anything that required fuel and ammunition and food and all the thousand logistical requirements that turned combat formations into slow, ponderous beasts. They were moving like they didn't care about logistics, like they didn't care about anything except forward momentum. "Show me again," he said to the young lieutenant hovering at his elbow. The lieutenant, pale and nervous, pointed with a wooden stick that trembled slightly. His name was Hoffman, 24 years old, too young for the Great War, too idealistic for this one. "Here, Herr Oberst, our last confirmed sighting placed the American Third Army elements near Avranches 4 days ago." 4 days. "Jawohl, Herr Oberst." Weber's finger traced the line from Avranches eastward. The distance made his stomach turn. 60 miles, perhaps more. Through towns his morning reports said were still under Wehrmacht control. Through roads his reconnaissance had cleared just yesterday. Through territory that should have been secure. And now, the lieutenant swallowed. Weber could see his Adam's apple bob in the dim light. "Le Mans, sir, our forward observers report American armor columns entering Le Mans. Multiple divisions, heavy equipment. 60 miles in 4 days, with an entire army. Unmöglich." Weber walked to the corner where cold coffee waited in a dented pot that had probably been requisitioned from some French farmhouse. Everything in this war was requisitioned now. Everything borrowed or stolen or taken from people who had no choice but to give. The coffee was Turkish thick and bitter, a gift from some supply officer who'd managed to scrounge it from God knew where. Everything in this war was cold now. Cold coffee, cold rations. Cold reports of divisions that no longer existed, of defensive lines that had evaporated like morning frost under summer sun, of soldiers who'd simply disappeared into the chaos of retreat. He poured a cup anyway, drank it, tasted nothing. His taste buds had stopped working somewhere around Normandy. Around the day the Allies landed and everything Weber had built over 4 years started to come apart. "What do we know about their commander?" Weber asked. The lieutenant shuffled through a stack of intelligence files, found one, opened it carefully like it might explode. "Third Army is under General Marcus Kane, sir. American, age 62 years, previously commanded in North Africa and Sicily. Lost his son in the Great War at Belleau Wood in 1918. Weber felt something twist in his chest. Belleau Wood, he'd been there. Not at the battle itself, but in the trenches north of it, close enough to hear the fighting. Close enough to know that whoever commanded the Americans at Belleau Wood had been willing to pay any price to take that forest. And now that commander's son was coming for him. No, not the same commander, the son. The father had lost his boy in that meat grinder, which might make him more dangerous. Men who'd lost sons to war fought differently. Weber had seen it before. They fought with a desperation that came from having nothing left to lose, from having already paid the highest price and deciding that payment entitled them to victory at any cost. "Age 62, Weber said. "An old man then?" The lieutenant nodded. "Yes, sir, but the reports suggest he's quite active. Our intelligence indicates he personally visits forward positions, rides in the turrets of tanks. His men say he never sleeps." "Nobody never sleeps." "No, sir, but..." The lieutenant hesitated. "But what?" "The reports also mention that his men have given him a nickname, sir. We've intercepted it multiple times on their radio traffic." Weber set down his cup, turned to face the young officer. "What do they call him?" The lieutenant looked uncomfortable, like he didn't want to say it, like saying it might make it real. "Der Geist, sir. We've intercepted it multiple times on their communications." "The ghost." "Der Geist. The ghost." Weber walked back to the tactical display, looked at the red pins clustered around Le Mans like blood drops on canvas. American units appearing where no American units should be. moving faster than their own reports, faster than information itself, faster than anything Weber had seen in 26 years of tracking armies across Europe. A ghost indeed, because ghosts didn't follow the laws of physics, didn't worry about supply lines or fuel consumption or the thousand small details that kept normal armies moving at normal speeds. Ghosts just appeared wherever they wanted and disappeared just as quickly. How many divisions? Weber asked quietly. At least 7 confirmed, sir, possibly more. It's difficult to get accurate counts when they're moving this fast. 7 divisions, 200,000 men, 4,000 vehicles, all moving at speeds that should be impossible, all commanded by a 62-year-old man who'd lost his son at Belleau Wood and apparently decided to make the Wehrmacht pay for it. Get me Berlin, Weber said. Someone needs to know we've lost track of an entire American army. The young lieutenant's face went even paler. Sir, if we report this, if we tell them we don't know where an entire American army is, I know what will happen. Weber's voice was flat, empty. The voice of a man who'd stopped caring about consequences somewhere around the 3rd year of this war. Do it anyway. Because the truth was the truth, and hiding it wouldn't make it any less true. The Americans were out there, somewhere, moving like ghosts through the French countryside, commanded by an old man who'd buried his son and decided that speed was the only memorial that mattered. And Weber had no idea how to stop them. 4 days earlier, August 1st, 1944, the thunder started before dawn, not weather. The sky above Avranches hung clear and pale, the kind of summer morning that promised heat by noon and the smell of dust and diesel by afternoon. The thunder came from the earth, from tank engines, from the mechanical heartbeat of an army that had been coiled tight for weeks and was now finally released. General Marcus Kane stood in the turret of his command tank and watched his divisions pour through the narrow gap between the Atlantic coast and the Bocage countryside. The dust rose in clouds that caught the early light and turned it gold. Beneath that golden curtain, turning it into something almost beautiful, America was going to war. 62 years had brought him to this moment. 62 years of living, 34 years of marriage, 26 years of grief, 30 years of wearing a uniform and learning how to turn young men into soldiers and soldiers into weapons and weapons into victory. All of it leading here, to this gap, to this morning, to this decision that he'd already made but hadn't yet spoken aloud. Margaret had said he'd earned rest, that younger men should carry this burden now, that he'd already given enough, that Thomas's death had paid the Kane family's debt to this war and all wars, and he had no obligation to keep bleeding for a country that had already taken his son. But Kane wasn't measuring his service by what he'd given. He was measuring it by what remained undone. He touched the ivory-handled revolvers at his hips, a habit now, a gesture so automatic he barely noticed doing it anymore. A prayer to ghosts who didn't answer. He'd carried these pistols since 1916, since Mexico, since the expedition against Pancho Villa, when the world was younger and war was still something that happened in deserts instead of trenches. The ivory was yellowed now, worn smooth by decades of touching, by decades of checking and rechecking, by decades of this same nervous habit that had started somewhere in the Great War and never stopped. But the weapons still fit his hands like they'd been made for him, because they had been. Everything about Marcus Kane had been made for this moment. The training at West Point, the peacetime assignments that taught him administration and logistics, the small wars in Central America that taught him combat, the years in North Africa and Sicily that taught him how to lead Americans against Germans. All of it preparation, all of it building toward this. Sir, Colonel Everett Donovan climbed up beside him, moving with the careful precision of a man who'd done this 1,000 times and knew exactly where to put his hands and feet. 48 years old, Chief of Staff, the man who actually ran Third Army while Kane made the decisions that ran the war. Donovan was everything Kane wasn't. Methodical where Kane was impulsive. Cautious where Kane was aggressive. A planner who thought in terms of logistics and supply lines and all the boring necessities that kept armies functioning, which was exactly why Kane needed him. The last division is through the gap, Donovan said. We're clear. German resistance. Light, sporadic. They're falling back faster than we can advance. It's like they're running. Not like. They were running. Kane could feel it. Some sixth sense developed over 3 decades of war. The same sense that had told him when to attack in North Africa, when to hold in Sicily, when to press, and when to wait. The Germans were broken. Not defeated yet, but broken. There was a difference. Kane pulled out his tactical chart. unfolded it against the turret rim. The Buckage country spread before him in green and brown contours, roads marked in red, German defensive positions marked in black. Someone had drawn them carefully. Some intelligence officer who'd spent hours cross-referencing aerial photographs and prisoner interrogations and radio intercepts. All wasted effort, because the black marks were already obsolete. The Germans weren't where the chart said they were. They were somewhere else, somewhere east, somewhere running. Bradley's orders are clear, Donovan said carefully. His voice had that tone, the one that meant he was about to say something Kane didn't want to hear but needed to hear anyway. Turn south into Brittany, secure the ports, methodical advance, consolidate our gains before pushing further. Kane studied the overlay. His finger traced the road south. Good ports in Brittany. Brest, St. Malo, critical for logistics, for bringing in supplies, for supporting the next phase of the advance. All good reasons to turn south. Then his finger traced the road east, toward Paris, toward the German border, toward the retreating enemy who wouldn't stay retreating forever, toward opportunity. Sir Donovan's voice held a question he hadn't yet asked, but Kane could hear it anyway. Could hear all the unspoken concerns, all the worries about orders and chains of command and what happened to generals who decided the plan didn't apply to them. The Germans aren't just falling back, Kane said quietly. They're running. Yes, sir. When your enemy runs, you don't watch him go. You chase him until he stops running. Then you chase him harder. You chase him until he can't run anymore, until he breaks completely. Donovan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was very careful. The voice of a man walking through a minefield of superior officers' egos. General Bradley's operational plan calls for securing Brittany first, consolidating our position, ensuring our supply lines are secure before I know what it calls for. Kane folded the chart. The paper crackled in the morning air. Somewhere below, a tank engine coughed and and then roared back to life. I wrote half of it. That wasn't quite true, but close enough. He looked east. The morning sun was climbing higher now, burning off the last of the dawn haze. Out there beyond the horizon, beyond the range of artillery and the reach of reconnaissance, the German 7th Army was coming apart. He could feel it the way sailors felt storms coming, the way farmers felt rain. The enemy was broken. Not defeated yet, but broken. And there was a difference between broken and defeated. Broken armies could regroup, could find new defensive lines, could dig in and make you pay for every mile. Defeated armies just died. Get me Lieutenant Bradford, Kane said. Nathaniel Bradford was 29 years old and had been in France for exactly 6 weeks. Before that, he'd been analyzing intercepted radio traffic in a basement in London, trying to make sense of German communications patterns while bombs fell overhead and the ceiling shook dust onto his paperwork. Before that, he'd been a graduate student at Yale studying medieval European history, writing his dissertation on the evolution of feudal military obligations in 12th century Normandy. War had a way of changing career plans. He arrived at Kane's tank 15 minutes later, carrying a leather case stuffed with papers and maps and the accumulated intelligence reports of the past 72 hours. His uniform was rumpled. He hadn't slept in 30 hours. There were coffee stains on his sleeve and a smudge of greased pencil on his collar. But his eyes were bright, sharp. The kind of brightness that came from knowing something important that nobody else knew yet. From seeing patterns in chaos. From understanding what the numbers meant. Sir, Bradford saluted, climbed halfway up the tank, finding handholds with the awkward precision of someone who'd never been particularly athletic. You wanted to see me? What's the intelligence picture? Bradford didn't need to consult his notes. He had the kind of mind that held information the way a sieve held water. Everything important stayed, everything else drained away. German 7th Army is in full retreat, sir. Not fighting retreat, full rout. We've intercepted radio traffic from 3 divisional headquarters requesting permission to withdraw. 2 of those requests were denied by Army Group B. 1 division withdrew anyway. Kane felt something shift in his chest. Hope, maybe, or vindication. Continue. Supply status is catastrophic from their perspective. They're abandoning equipment. We found 2 fuel depots intact yesterday. Completely intact. They didn't even try to destroy them. Just left them. Ammunition. Dumps scattered across the countryside. Field hospitals abandoned with wounded still in them. Medical supplies, food, everything. Bradford's voice picked up speed the way it always did when he got excited about data. Sir, this isn't an organized withdrawal. This is panic. They're not falling back to prepared positions, Kane said. No, sir, they're just falling back. Wherever they can, however they can. Donovan cleared his throat. Could be a trap. Draw us forward, then counterattack the flanks. With what? Bradford shook his head. Sir, we've been monitoring their communications for 3 days. They don't have anything left to counterattack with. Everything they had was committed to stopping the breakout. They failed. Now they're just trying to survive long enough to establish a new defensive line somewhere east. Kane looked at Donovan, then at Bradford. Two different kinds of intelligence. Donovan's caution born from experience and knowledge of what could go wrong. Bradford's confidence born from data and intercepts in the cold mathematics of logistics. Both valuable, both necessary. But right now, Kane needed to know which one to trust. Show me the map, Kane said. Bradford unfolded his intelligence overlay. It was a mess of greased pencil marks and corrections and notes scribbled in margins. The kind of document that was constantly being updated as new information came in. Estimated German positions were marked in red, supply routes in blue, command posts with squares, artillery positions with circles. The picture was clear. The entire German defensive line was collapsing inward like a building whose foundation had been removed. Not falling uniformly, not in an organized way, but collapsing nonetheless. Units bunching up as they retreated, creating traffic jams, creating chaos, creating opportunity. If we turn south, Kane said slowly, thinking out loud, we secure Brittany, the ports, Brest-Saint-Malo, the whole peninsula. Good logistics for the next phase. Good supply lines. Everything by the book. Yes, sir, Bradford said. And the Germans get a week to regroup, to establish new defensive lines, to bring up reserves from Germany, to reorganize these broken divisions into something that can fight again. Kane's finger traced east on the overlay, through Laval, through Le Mans, through territory that should be swarming with German defenders, but apparently wasn't. But if we turn east, he continued, if we drive into the interior while they're still reeling, while they're still running, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Bradford saw it. His eyes widened slightly, pupils dilating with the understanding of what Kane was suggesting. Sir, if we could get behind them, cut their supply lines while they're still trying to retreat, we could trap the entire 7th Army. 8 divisions, Kane said, maybe more. Every division we destroy here is one less division between us and Berlin. One less division that has to be fought later. One less set of defensive positions that has to be assaulted at cost. One less set of casualties, Bradford added quietly. One less telegram sent to mothers and wives. One less gold star in a window. One less funeral that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. Donovan cleared his throat. Sir, that would require deviating significantly from the operational plan. We'd need authorization from Schaeff, from General Stone. Kane looked at his chief of staff. Donovan was a good man, a careful man, the kind of officer who read regulations before making decisions and slept well at night because he'd followed every procedure, who believed in chains of command and proper authorization and all the things that kept armies functioning as cohesive organizations instead of collections of individual commanders doing whatever they wanted. Kane respected that, needed that, but right now he needed something else. How long to get authorization from Schaeff? Kane asked, though he already knew the answer. Minimum 48 hours, more realistically 3 or 4 days. Stone will need to consult with Montgomery, with Bradley, with the British chiefs, with the political people in Washington and London. Coalition warfare requires coordination, sir. Consensus. And in 3 or 4 days, Donovan knew the answer too. The Germans will have reorganized, established new defensive lines, brought up reserves. The opportunity will be gone. Exactly. The 3 men stood around the chart in silence. Below them, 3rd Army continued to flow through the gap, tanks grinding forward in long columns, trucks carrying infantry and supplies, artillery pieces towed by half-tracks, self-propelled guns, tank destroyers, the whole massive machinery of modern war. 200,000 men and all their equipment moving at the speed of a decision that had already been made but not yet spoken. Kane looked at the chart again, at the red marks showing where the Germans were supposed to be, at the blue lines showing where 3rd Army was supposed to go, south into Brittany, safe, methodical, by the book, and wrong. Lieutenant Bradford, Kane said, I want you to monitor all German radio traffic, every frequency we can intercept, every division, every corps, every army group. I want to know where they are before they know where they are. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Bradford's answer came without hesitation. I'll need more translators, more radio operators. But yes, sir. Get them, whatever you need. Kane turned to Donovan. Colonel, send a brief message to Schaeff. Third Army has broken through at Avranches, encountering light resistance, advancing per operational plan. Nothing more specific than that. Donovan's face was carefully neutral. The expression of a man who'd just been asked to do something that wasn't quite illegal but wasn't quite legal either. Sir Schaeff will expect regular position reports, detailed updates on our location and movements. Then they'll be disappointed. Kane looked east again. The sun was fully up now. It was going to be a beautiful day. Hot, clear, perfect weather for an advance. Maintain minimal radio contact. Only essential traffic. Operational necessity only. Sir, Donovan's voice was quiet, very quiet. You're talking about taking an entire army off the board without telling anyone, without coordinating with adjacent units, without informing higher headquarters of our actual intentions. I'm talking about winning this war before Christmas. And if General Stone finds out, Kane smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a man who'd already made peace with consequences. He'll be furious. He'll threaten to relieve me. He'll lecture me about coalition warfare and unity of command and all the other things they teach at Staff College. All the things I learned 30 years ago and have been ignoring whenever necessary ever since. And then he'll look at the results. He'll see how many German divisions we've destroyed, how many Allied casualties we've prevented, how much closer to Berlin we are. Kane's smile faded, and he'll realize I was right. Donovan didn't look convinced. Bradford didn't look convinced either. But neither of them looked away. Neither of them said no. Gentlemen, Kane said quietly, my son died in the last war because his generals moved like glaciers. They planned and coordinated and consulted while the best generation we ever produced died in a French forest. They held conferences while boys bled out in mud. They worried about chains of command while mothers buried their children. He touched the revolvers again. A habit, a prayer, a connection to something he'd lost 26 years ago and would never get back. I will not do that to this generation. If I see an opportunity to end this war faster, to bring these boys home sooner, to prevent even one mother from receiving the telegram that Margaret received in 1918, I will take it, whatever the cost to my career, whatever the cost to my reputation, whatever the cost to my friendship with Maxwell Stone. He looked at both of them, really looked, making sure they understood. Do you understand? Bradford spoke first. Yes, sir. His voice was steady, certain, the voice of a man who'd done the analysis and believed in the conclusion. Donovan took longer. He looked at the chart, at the troops below, at Kane, at the future they were about to create or destroy, depending on how this gamble played out. Finally, yes, sir. Good. Kane jumped down from the tank, landed hard. His knees protested. 62 is past the age for jumping off tanks. But he wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. Colonel Donovan, get the divisions moving, maximum speed. I want lead elements at Laval by tonight. Laval, Donovan blinked. Sir, that's 60 miles from here. That's where we're going. That's where the Germans aren't expecting us. That's where we cut their supply lines and turn this retreat into a rout. Kane smiled. Move out. The word spread through Third Army like electricity through wire. Move, move, move. Tank commanders received orders to bypass resistance. Keep rolling. If a town had Germans in it, go around the town. If a road was blocked, find another road. If the Germans tried to make a stand, pin them with infantry and keep the armor moving. The objective wasn't to fight. The objective was to keep moving. Because the moment you stopped, someone would tell you to stop for longer. Someone would want to consolidate, to secure flanks, to wait for supplies, to coordinate with adjacent units. Someone would want to slow down. And slowing down meant giving the enemy time to regroup, time to establish new defensive lines, time to turn this rout back into a war. Corporal Hank Morrison was 22 years old and had been assigned to 3rd Army's headquarters radio section for exactly 3 weeks, long enough to learn the frequencies and call signs, long enough to understand the rhythms of military communications, long enough to realize that what was happening now wasn't normal. His job was to monitor incoming communications, log them, route them to the appropriate staff officer. It was boring work, monotonous, the kind of thing that made you understand why some guys volunteered for infantry just to have something different to do, until the 4th of August when it became terrifying work. Sir, Morrison stood in front of Colonel Donovan's field desk holding a stack of message slips. His hands were shaking slightly. "Schaeff is asking for our position." Donovan looked up from the chart he'd been studying. "What did you tell them?" "I said we'd transmitted our position in yesterday's report, sir." "Did we?" "No, sir." Donovan's expression didn't change. "Then tell them we're making good progress, encountering light resistance. We'll provide detailed report when tactical situation permits." Morrison wrote it down with a pencil that felt slippery in his sweating palm. Hesitated. "Sir, they've asked 3 times in the last 12 hours. "Then tell them we're busy." Donovan went back to his chart. Morrison didn't move. He knew he should salute and leave and send the message and go back to his radio and pretend everything was normal. But everything wasn't normal. Donovan looked up again. "Something else, Corporal." "Sir, with respect, I've been monitoring Schaeff Communications, their operations section, their intelligence updates." Morrison swallowed. "They don't know where we are. They're guessing based on the operational plan, but their situation display doesn't match our actual position." "I know." "Sir, we're 60 miles east of where they think we are." "I know that too." Morrison felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Sir, are we allowed to do this?" The question hung in the air. Donovan set down his pencil, looked at the young corporal. Really looked. Saw what Morrison was 22 years old, 11 months in the Army, scared, uncertain, trying to do the right thing, but not sure what the right thing was anymore. Donovan had been that age once, had felt that uncertainty, had wondered if his superiors knew what they were doing or if they were just making it up as they went along. Now he was the superior, and he was definitely making it up as he went along. "Corporal Morrison," Donovan said carefully, "what we're doing is called exploiting a tactical opportunity. General Kane has identified a weakness in the German defensive line. We are moving to take advantage of that weakness before it closes." "Yes, sir." "The fact that this movement takes us outside our originally assigned operational zone is incidental to the larger tactical picture." "Yes, sir." "The fact that we haven't informed higher headquarters of this movement in precise detail is because our primary responsibility is to the mission, not to paperwork. Our mission is to destroy German forces, which we are doing." Morrison didn't look convinced. Donovan softened slightly. "Look, son, I've been doing this for 23 years. I know the rules. I know the regulations. I know what we're supposed to do. I know how chains of command are supposed to work. And this isn't it." "No." Donovan smiled slightly. "This isn't it. But General Kane is the best tactical commander I've ever served under. Better than anyone I met in the last war. Better than anyone I've met in this one. He sees things other people don't see. Opportunities that would never occur to more cautious men. He makes decisions in 30 seconds that would take other generals 3 days. And 9 times out of 10 his decisions are right. And the 10th time," Donovan's smile faded, "that's why God invented chiefs of staff. To clean up after geniuses, to manage the consequences of brilliance, to make sure the paperwork gets filed even if it gets filed late." He picked up his pencil again. "Run the message." And Morrison. "Sir, get used to this feeling, this uncertainty, this sense that you're part of something that's either going to be remembered as brilliant or court-martialed as reckless." Donovan went back to his chart. "Because it's going to be a long war, and General Kane is going to give you that feeling a lot." By the 3rd of August, Army had advanced 42 miles in 2 days. By any conventional measure, by any standard taught at Staff College, or written in field manuals or practiced in peacetime exercises, it was impossible. Armored divisions needed rest, maintenance, fuel, food, sleep. You couldn't just point them at the horizon and expect them to keep rolling indefinitely. Tracks broke, engines overheated, men collapsed from exhaustion. Supply lines stretched until they snapped. That was the theory, except Kane did exactly that. Pointed his divisions at the horizon and told them to keep moving. And somehow impossibly it worked. The fuel came from captured German depots. The food came from French towns that welcomed them with wine and bread and tears and stories about 4 years of occupation finally ending. The rest came during brief stops, 2 hours here, 3 hours there, enough for mechanics to patch tracks and drivers to close their eyes before someone shook them awake again. Keep moving. Always moving, never stopping long enough for someone to tell them to stop. Morrison rode in the back of a radio truck, headphones clamped to his ears, monitoring a dozen frequencies simultaneously. He listened to Third Army units reporting their positions, listened to Schaeff asking questions that nobody answered, listened to adjacent Allied units wondering where Third Army had gone, and he listened to German radio traffic. Frantic, confused, desperate. Units calling for reinforcements that would never arrive. Headquarters demanding status reports from divisions that no longer existed as cohesive formations. Orders being issued into positions that had already been overrun. The sound of an army coming apart in real time. And underneath it all, a word he kept hearing repeated. Der Geist, the ghost. They're talking about General Kane, Lieutenant Bradford told him during a brief stop outside Laval. The Germans. They've given him a nickname. Morrison pulled off his headphones, rubbed his ears. Der Geist. I've heard it maybe 20 times today. The ghost. Because we keep appearing in places we're not supposed to be. Places their intelligence said were empty. Bradford grinned. The grin of someone who understood what was happening and found it beautiful in its audacity. They can't track us, can't predict us, can't figure out what we're doing or where we're going next. To them, we're haunting the countryside, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. Morrison thought about that. What does General Kane think about the nickname? Bradford's grin faded. I don't think he cares what anyone calls him. German, American, whatever. He only cares about one thing. What's that? Ending this war before another generation bleeds to death in France. Before more mothers get the telegram his wife got in 1980. Bradford looked east toward where the advance was continuing, even now, even during this brief stop. He lost his son at Belleau Wood. Did you know that Morrison didn't? Thomas Kane, 23 years old, killed by German machine gun fire while assaulting a position that his commanders had been too slow to hit when it was weakly defended. By the time they finally attacked, the Germans had reinforced it. Thomas died taking a position that could have been taken a week earlier with no casualties if his generals had moved faster. Bradford picked up his case of intelligence reports. General Kane hasn't forgotten that, and he's damn sure not going to let it happen again. Not to this generation. Not on his watch. Morrison watched Bradford walk away. Thought about that. About a general who'd lost his son and was now racing across France to prevent other fathers from experiencing the same loss. About a general who'd decided that speed was the best memorial he could build. About a general who was willing to risk everything. Career, reputation, friendship to save lives by moving faster than regulations allowed. Der Geist, the ghost. Morrison put his headphones back on and returned to listening to the Germans panic. The call came through on the evening of August 5th. Morrison was monitoring the command net when the signal came in. Strong, clear, encoded with the highest priority designation. Direct from SHAEF headquarters in Portsmouth, England. His stomach dropped. He knew what this was before he decoded it. He knew what it meant. Sir, he handed the decoded message to Colonel Donovan. His hand shook slightly as he passed it over. From General Stone, personal, eyes only for General Kane. Donovan read it. His face didn't change expression, but Morrison had been watching him for 3 weeks now, had learned to read the small signs, the way his jaw tightened. The way his eyes went very still, the way he set the paper down with exaggerated care as if it might explode. Where's the general? Donovan asked quietly. Forward with 4th Armored Division, sir, near Le Mans. He went up this morning to check their fuel status. Of course he did, because Kane was always forward, always with the troops, always somewhere he could see the battle with his own eyes instead of reading about it in reports. Get him on the radio. Priority 1. It took 15 minutes to establish contact. 15 minutes of Morrison calling and recalling and working through relay stations and intermediate headquarters until finally Kane's voice crackled over the speaker. Calm, unhurried. Like he was discussing the weather instead of commanding an army that was currently 60 miles from where it was supposed to be. This is Kane. Go ahead. Sir, message from General Stone. Donovan read it word for word, every syllable. Report to SHAEF headquarters, Portsmouth, immediately. Personal order. No delay authorized. Acknowledge. There was a long silence. Morrison watched the radio as if he could see through it to wherever Kane was standing. Some field headquarters, some abandoned farmhouse, some map-covered table in the French countryside where the future of Third Army was being decided. Finally acknowledged. I'll be wheels up in 2 hours. Donovan, you have operational command until I return. Yes, sir. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Kane's voice again. Quieter, more personal. The voice of a man talking to a friend instead of a subordinate. Everett, keep them moving. Don't let anyone tell you to stop. Don't let anyone convince you we need to consolidate or wait for supplies or coordinate with adjacent units. We're 4 days into the greatest opportunity of this war. Don't waste it. Sir, if General Stone relieves you, he won't. Kane sounded absolutely certain. Like he'd already wargamed this conversation a dozen times and knew exactly how it would end. Because in 48 hours, Operation Luttich is going to start. The Germans are going to counterattack at Mortain with everything they have left. 4 panzer divisions, 50,000 men. It's their last chance to cut us off and push us back to the sea. Donovan stared at the radio. Morrison stared at Donovan. How do you know about Luttich? Donovan asked. French resistance contacts, intelligence intercepts, pattern analysis. Bradford has been tracking German radio traffic, and he's seen them repositioning forces. Kane's voice carried a smile that Morrison could somehow hear through the static. Doesn't matter how I know. What matters is I'm right. And when they attack, they're going to find out their supply lines run through territory we already control, through roads we already dominate. They'll attack and they'll fail, and they'll lose everything they have left. And when Stone sees that, he'll understand. He'll realize that every hour he delayed me, every day he made me wait for authorization would have cost lives. American lives, Allied lives. Kane paused. Max is a good man, a careful man, but he's not stupid. When he sees the results, he'll know I did the right thing. And if you're wrong, Joe, then I'll be relieved of command, sent home in disgrace, and spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have done something different. If I should have asked for permission instead of forgiveness. If I should have been more cautious. The radio crackled. But I'm not wrong, Everett. I've been doing this for 30 years. I've been reading Germans for 3 decades. I'm not wrong about this. Yes, sir. 2 hours. Then I'll go explain to Maxwell Stone why I just spent 4 days disappearing an entire army without telling anyone where we were going. The connection cut. Morrison looked at Donovan. Sir, what happens if General Stone relieves him? What happens to Third Army? Donovan was quiet for a long moment. He stood up, walked to the map on the wall. Red pins showing Third Army's advance. Blue pins showing where German positions used to be before Kane had driven through them like smoke. Then we lose the best commander in this army, Donovan said quietly. And a lot more men die before this war ends. A lot more mothers get telegrams. A lot more families bury their sons. He turned back to Morrison. But that's not going to happen. Because General Stone is many things cautious, political careful about coalition relationships, but he's not a fool. And only a fool fires the general who's winning. Morrison wanted to believe that. He wasn't sure he did. But he went back to his radio and kept monitoring the frequencies and listened to the Germans continue to panic about Der Geist. The ghost who kept appearing where he shouldn't be. The ghost who kept moving when he should have stopped. The ghost who was about to go explain himself to the one man who could make him stop haunting. Marcus Kane stood beside the C-47 transport aircraft on a dirt airstrip outside Le Mans and looked east one last time. Out there, his army was still moving, still advancing, still chasing the broken remnants of the German 7th Army toward Paris and beyond. Still doing exactly what he'd ordered them to do 4 days ago when he'd made the decision that had brought him to this moment. He'd started something that couldn't be stopped now. The momentum was too great, the opportunity too clear, the German collapse too complete. But whether he'd be there to see it through depended on the next 24 hours. On one meeting, on one conversation, on one man. Maxwell Stone. They'd known each other for 35 years. Met at West Point when they were both 19 years old and the world was different, and war was something that happened to other people in other places. Served together in the Philippines when the army was small and everyone knew everyone. Stayed in touch through the peacetime years when promotions came slowly and most officers spent more time playing politics than soldiering. Rivals sometimes, friends more often, brothers in everything but blood. But he now Stone wore 4 stars and commanded at all Allied forces in Europe, answered to Churchill and Roosevelt and Eisenhower, managed coalition politics and British egos and American ambitions and the 1,000 competing interests that made modern warfare as much about diplomacy as combat. And Kane had just spent 4 days making Stone's job immeasurably harder. He climbed into the aircraft. The engines coughed, caught, roared to life with the sound of controlled explosions and machinery turning fuel into motion. Through the small window, he watched France fall away beneath him, the Bocage country where they'd broken through, the roads packed with his tanks still moving east, the future he'd chosen spreading out like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. Margaret's last letter sat in his breast pocket. He'd read it 5 times now, memorized every word, every curve of her handwriting, every place where her pen had pressed harder because emotion had overtaken penmanship. "Come home safe," she'd written. "I've already buried one Cain in France. I won't bury another. Whatever glory you're chasing, whatever victory you think you need to achieve, it's not worth your life. Thomas is gone. Don't make me lose you too." He touched the revolvers at his hips, thought of Thomas, 23 years old, dead in Belowood, buried in a military cemetery with thousands of others who died because their generals had been too slow, too cautious, too concerned with proper procedures to see opportunities when they appeared. Thomas had died waiting for reinforcements that arrived too late, waiting for artillery support that never came, waiting for generals to make decisions that should have been made days earlier. Cain had sworn then, standing at his son's grave with Margaret sobbing beside him, that if he ever had the power to prevent that kind of waste, that kind of bureaucratic murder, he would use it. No matter the case, no matter the consequences, no matter what it cost him personally. "I'm doing this for him," Cain whispered to the empty aircraft, to the ghosts, to Thomas. For all of them, so their sons don't have to die the same way. So no more fathers have to stand at graves and wonder if faster decisions might have saved their boys. The engines droned on. Below, the English Channel appeared. Gray water meeting gray sky. The border between France and England, between the war and the rear area, between the place where decisions mattered and the place where they were second-guessed. Ahead, Portsmouth waited, and Maxwell Stone, and the reckoning that had been 4 days in coming. Cain pulled out Margaret's letter one more time. Read it again. Tried to imagine what he'd say to her if this conversation with Stone went the wrong way. If he was relieved of command and sent home in disgrace. If his gamble failed and all he had to show for it was a court-martial and a ruined reputation. He'd tell her he was sorry, that he'd tried to do the right thing, that sometimes the right thing and the authorized thing weren't the same, that he'd rather be court-martialed for saving lives than decorated for following orders that got people killed. He'd tell her he loved her, that he'd never stopped loving her, that losing Thomas had broken something in him that could never be fixed, but that she'd been the only thing holding the pieces together. He'd tell her that if he had to do it again, he'd make the same choice, because some things were worth any price, even friendship, even career, even the slim margin between vindication and disaster that he'd been walking for 4 days without knowing if the ground beneath his feet was solid or air. Cain folded the letter, put it back in his pocket, over his heart, closed his eyes, and for the first time in 96 hours he slept, dreaming of ghosts and glory, and the son he'd lost, and the war he was trying to end before more sons died the same way. The C-47 touched down at Portsmouth just after dawn on August 6, 1944. Cain watched through the small window as the runway came up to meet them. Concrete, solid, British. The jolt of wheels on ground shook him fully awake from the shallow sleep he'd managed during the crossing. 2 hours of unconsciousness that felt like 2 minutes. His body was learning to sleep anywhere, anytime, in any position, a skill that came with age and war. Outside, no honor guard waited on the tarmac, no flags snapping in the morning wind, no ceremony. Just a single staff car, dark and official, with a stone-faced driver who opened the rear door without meeting Cain's eyes. The driver was a sergeant, perhaps 40, old enough to have served in the last war, and old enough to recognize the significance of a general being summoned like this, old enough to know what it meant. The drive to Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force took 20 minutes through the English countryside. Cain watched it roll past. Green fields divided by ancient stone walls, sheep grazing on hillsides that had known sheep for 1,000 years, villages with Norman churches and Tudor cottages, a landscape untouched by war, at least on the surface. But Cain could see the scars if he looked closely. The military convoys on every road, trucks carrying ammunition and food, and all the supplies needed to keep 3 million men fighting across the channel. The makeshift hospitals and requisitioned manor houses, their lawns filled with white tents and walking wounded. The rationing posters in every village, stern-faced officials reminding citizens that loose lips sink ships, and your courage, your cheerfulness, your resolution will bring us victory. War changed everything, even the things it didn't destroy. Even England, even places far from the fighting. The headquarters occupied a sprawling Victorian building that had probably been something elegant before the war. A country estate, a school, something with history and dignity. Now it was painted in drab military colors and surrounded by temporary structures and radio antennas and all the infrastructure of modern command. It smelled of floor wax and desperation and too many men working in too small a space. Staff officers filled the corridors, moving with the brittle efficiency of people managing a crisis they didn't fully understand. They wore British uniforms and American uniforms and uniforms from half a dozen allied nations. They carried folders and maps and the worried expressions of men responsible for coordinating operations across an entire continent. They glanced at Kane as he passed. Some saluted crisply, recognizing rank even if they didn't recognize the man. Others looked away quickly, recognizing the man and understanding why he was here. Everyone knew why he was here. Word traveled fast in headquarters, faster than information traveled in the field. Gossip moved at the speed of rumor and speculation, and by now, everyone from the file clerks to the generals knew that Marcus Kane had gone off the reservation. That Third Army had disappeared for 4 days, that the Supreme Commander was not pleased. A young captain intercepted him outside Stone's office. "General Kane, sir, the Supreme Commander will see you shortly. General Hayes is with him now." Robert Hayes, Army Group Commander. Kane's immediate superior in the chain of command. A good man, a friend after a fashion. The kind of officer who believed in doing things properly but also understood when proper meant slow and slow meant deadly. Hayes would be in there trying to defend him, or trying to find a middle ground, or trying to figure out how to minimize the damage to everyone involved. Kane settled into a chair in the anteroom and waited. Through the closed door he could hear voices. Not the words, just the rhythm. Stone's voice measured and controlled the cadence of a man making points in logical sequence. Hayes responding quieter, more placating, the tone of someone trying to diffuse a situation before it exploded. The argument of men trying to decide what to do about a problem they couldn't solve by following regulations. 20 minutes passed. Kane used the time to prepare, to rehearse arguments, to anticipate questions, to think through every possible direction this conversation could go and how he'd respond. But underneath the preparation was something else. Fear, not of being relieved. He'd made peace with that possibility 4 days ago when he'd decided to turn east instead of south. Being relieved would be embarrassing, but not catastrophic. He'd go home to Margaret, retire, live out his days knowing he'd done what he thought was right. No, what scared him was something deeper. The possibility that Stone would be right, that his gamble would fail, that the Germans would counterattack successfully, that Third Army would be cut off and destroyed, that thousands of men would die because Marcus Kane had been too arrogant to follow orders, too certain of his own brilliance to trust the system, that he'd be remembered not as Der Geist, but as the general who threw away an entire army chasing ghosts. The door opened. Hayes emerged, saw Kane, and his expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession. Relief that Kane had arrived, frustration at the situation, something that might have been pity or sympathy, or both. "Marcus," Hayes extended his hand. Kane stood, shook it. Hayes's grip was firm but brief, professional. "Walk with me," Hayes said. They moved down the corridor away from listening ears and watching eyes, found an empty conference room. Hayes closed the door carefully, checking twice to make sure it latched properly. "Tell me you have a good explanation," Hayes said without preamble. "I have several." Kane remained standing, his body automatically settling into parade rest, even though this wasn't a formal briefing. Old habits. "Which one does Stone want to hear?" Hayes didn't smile. "The one where you didn't take an entire army off the operational map for 4 days without telling anyone where you were going or what you were doing?" "Then I don't have one." Jesus, Marcus." Hayes sat down heavily in one of the conference room chairs. They were the cheap government-issue kind that made your back ache after 20 minutes. He rubbed his face with both hands, the gesture of a man who hadn't slept enough and knew he wouldn't sleep enough tonight either. "Do you understand the position you've put Stone in? Put all of us in, put the entire Allied command structure in. I understand I found an opportunity to trap 8 German divisions and possibly end the war in France by Christmas. Without authorization. Authorization takes time. The opportunity wouldn't wait." Hayes pulled out a chart from a folder he'd been carrying, unfolded it on the conference table. His finger traced Third Army's route from Avranches to Le Mans. 60 miles represented by a red line that cut across territory that should have been contested, but apparently wasn't. "The Germans are calling you Der Geist," Hayes said. "Did you know that? I've heard. And they can't track you, can't predict where you'll appear next. Their intelligence network is in complete chaos." Hayes looked up and Kane saw something in his eyes. Not quite admiration, not quite approval, but something close. "Ours isn't much better. For 3 days, we had no confirmed position reports from Third Army. 3 days, Marcus. Do you know what Stone had to tell Churchill? Kane could guess. That he'd misplaced an army. That's not funny. I'm not joking. Kane pulled him out by other chair and sat down across from Hayes. The table between them was scarred and stained, marked by years of men leaning on it, writing on it, pounding it in frustration. Bob, listen to me. The German 7th Army is broken. Not bending. Broken. If we'd followed the operational plan turned south into Brittany, the way Bradley's orders specified, they'd have had a week to regroup, to bring up reserves from Germany, to establish new defensive lines that our men would have to assault at cost. So you decided to rewrite the plan on your own authority. I decided to win. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Outside the conference room, Kane could hear footsteps in the corridor. Voices, the constant hum of activity that never stopped in a headquarters building. The sound of war being managed by men far from the fighting. Montgomery is furious, Hayes said finally. He's demanding your immediate relief. Says you've violated every principle of coalition warfare. Says American commanders are undisciplined cowboys who endanger the entire operation with their recklessness. Kane had expected that. Montgomery had never liked him. The feeling was mutual. Churchill called Roosevelt last night, Hayes continued. At 0300 London time, woke him up. Do you understand what that means? The Prime Minister of Great Britain calling the President of the United States in the middle of the night to complain about an American general. Kane understood. It meant the problem had escalated beyond military command into political territory. It meant careers were at stake, reputations, alliance relationships. The delicate balance of coalition warfare, where British pride and American power had to be carefully managed to keep everyone fighting the same enemy instead of each other. It meant Stone was under pressure Kane couldn't even imagine. There's something else, Hayes said quietly. His voice changed, became more careful. Intelligence has confirmed German preparations for a major counteroffensive, Operation Lüttich, 4 panzer divisions, attacking at Mortain within the next 72 hours. Kane felt something shift in his chest, vindication and dread in equal measure. I know. That's why I positioned Third Army where I did, to cut their supply lines before they launch. Hayes stared at him. How long have you known about Lüttich? 3 days. French resistance contacts provided initial intelligence. Radio intercepts confirmed it. Lieutenant Bradford has been tracking German communications and spotted them repositioning armor. Kane leaned forward. Bob, if we'd followed the original plan, Third Army would be in Brittany right now, 60 miles from where we need to be to stop Lüttich. The Germans would attack and they'd have a real chance of success. They might actually cut us off, push us back to the sea, and thousands of men would die. Yes, but you couldn't tell anyone this because if I'd asked for permission to change the plan, Stone would have needed 3 days to coordinate with Bradley and Montgomery and the combined chiefs. 3 days of meetings and conferences and political maneuvering. And by then Lüttich would be launching and we'd be in the wrong position to stop it. Hayes folded the chart slowly, precisely. The gesture of a man buying time to think, to process, to figure out how to navigate between what was right and what was authorized. Stone is going to ask you one question, Marcus, just one, and your answer will determine whether you keep your command or get sent home in disgrace. What's the question? Hayes met his eyes. Who gave you permission to change the operational plan? Kane didn't answer, because they both knew the answer. Nobody. Nobody had given him permission because he hadn't asked for permission. Because asking would have meant waiting, and waiting would have meant wasting the opportunity. He's your friend, Hayes said quietly. You've known him for 35 years, but right now in that office, he's not your friend. He's the supreme commander, and you've put him in an impossible position. I know. Do you? Hayes stood up. Because from where I'm sitting, you've made it very easy for him to relieve you. You've given him every regulation, every protocol, every justification he needs. The only thing stopping him is the fact that you might be right, that your insubordination might have saved thousands of lives. He walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the knob. But Marcus, if you're wrong, if Lüttich doesn't happen, or happens somewhere else, or your positioning doesn't matter, then you've destroyed your career and Stone's credibility for nothing. Hayes opened the door. He's ready for you now. The office was smaller than Kane expected, smaller and somehow more oppressive, like the walls were closer than they should be, like the ceiling pressed down with the weight of decisions that affected millions of lives. Maxwell Stone stood behind a desk covered with charts and reports and decoded radio transmissions. All the paperwork of coalition warfare distilled into stacks of paper that threatened to slide onto the floor. He was reading something when Kane entered. Didn't look up. Didn't acknowledge the salute Kane rendered with parade ground precision. Just kept reading. The silence stretched. Kane remained at attention. West Point had taught him many things. One of them was when to wait. When to let the superior officer control the tempo and rhythm of a conversation. When to be patient, even though every instinct screamed to speak, to explain, to defend. He waited. Finally, Stone set down the document. Looked up. His face was carefully neutral, but Kane had known him for 35 years. Since they were 19 years old and everything was possible and the world made sense. He could read the signs. The tightness around the eyes that meant Stone hadn't slept well. The way he held his shoulders rigid with controlled tension. The absolute stillness that meant Stone was containing considerable anger through sheer force of will. Sit down, Marcus. Kane sat. Stone walked to the window, looked out at Portsmouth Harbor. Gray water. Gray sky, gray ships preparing for the next convoy to France. Everything gray except the white cliffs in the distance, and even those looked gray in the morning light. I received a call from Winston Churchill at 300 hours this morning, Stone said conversationally. His voice was calm, almost casual, dangerously calm. Do you know what the Prime Minister of Great Britain wanted to discuss at 3 in the morning? I can guess. He wanted to know how the Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe had managed to lose track of an entire American army, how a formation of 200,000 men and 4,000 vehicles had simply vanished from our operational map for 4 days. Stone's voice remained calm, but something underneath it was cold. Arctic cold. He wanted to know if this represented a failure of command, of control, of basic military competence. Kane said nothing. Montgomery called 4 hours before that. He was less diplomatic. He suggested that American commanders were cowboys, undisciplined, reckless, dangerous to coalition cohesion. Stone turned from the window. His eyes were very cold. He demanded your immediate relief. Used the word demanded, not suggested, not recommended. Demanded. And what did you tell him? I told him I would handle my commanders my way. Stone's voice could have frozen water. I did not tell him I had no idea where you were, what you were doing, or whether you were following any plan that bore any resemblance to the operational orders this headquarters issued. He walked back to his desk, sat down, folded his hands on the surface. The hands were steady, but Kane could see the knuckles were white. So, Marcus, explain to me. Make me understand. Why should I not relieve you of command right now? Why should I not send you home and give Third Army to someone who actually follows orders? Kane had prepared for this moment, had rehearsed arguments during the flight from France, had spent hours thinking through tactical justifications and strategic opportunities and all the reasons why his decision had been right. But sitting across from Stone, seeing the weight on his old friend's shoulders, seeing the genuine hurt underneath the anger, all those prepared arguments felt hollow, felt like excuses. I can't, Kane said quietly. Stone blinked. Excuse me. I can't give you a reason and not to relieve me, because by every regulation, every protocol, every standard of military discipline, you should. Kane met his eyes. I knowingly exceeded my operational authority. I deliberately maintained radio silence to prevent higher headquarters from countermanding my decisions. I took Third Army 60 miles outside our assigned zone without authorization or coordination. Then why? The question hung in the air between them. Why? Not how or what or when. Why? Because I saw the chance to save thousands of lives, Kane said, and I took it. Stone's jaw tightened. A muscle jumped beneath his left eye. That's not your decision to make. Whose decision is it? Kane leaned forward. Max, the German 7th Army, was broken. Not bending, not retreating in good order. Broken, running, abandoning equipment, fleeing in disorder. Every hour we followed the old plan was an hour they used to escape, to regroup, to prepare new defensive lines that our men would have to assault at terrible cost. So you took it upon yourself to revise coalition strategy. I took it upon yourself to exploit an opportunity before it closed. Without consulting anyone. Stone's voice rose slightly, the first crack in his control. Without coordinating with the adjacent units. Without ensuring your flanks were secured. Without giving a damn whether your actions endangered the entire operation. My actions could have gotten your entire army destroyed. Stone stood abruptly. Both hands came down on the desk. Not quite a slam, but close enough. Do you know what could have happened? If the Germans had counterattacked your exposed flanks, if your supply lines had been cut while you were 60 miles beyond supporting distance, if another Allied unit had called for fire support in your sector, not knowing you were there, and hit your own men by mistake. They didn't. Because you were lucky, Stone's voice filled the small office. Jesus Christ, Marcus. You were lucky you gambled with 200,000 lives, and you were lucky the Germans were too disorganized to exploit your recklessness. And now you're asking me to bet the entire European campaign on your luck continuing. The room fell silent. Outside, Kane could hear footsteps in the corridor, telephones ringing, the machinery of war grinding on, indifferent to the drama of two old men arguing about decisions that couldn't be unmade. Stone sat down slowly. The anger seemed to drain out of him, replaced by something worse. Exhaustion. Disappointment. The look of a man who'd been betrayed by someone he'd trusted. He rubbed his face with both hands. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. Tired. I've known you for 35 years, Stone said. West Point, the Philippines, the peacetime years when there were more parades than battles. I was at Thomas's funeral. Kane felt something tighten in his chest, the mention of Thomas. Stone rarely mentioned Thomas. I know why you did this, Stone continued. I know about the letter Margaret sent you, about how she begged you to end this war quickly, to bring the boys home before more mothers had to bury their sons. Max, I know because Catherine asked me the same thing. Stone's voice was almost gentle now, gentle and heartbroken. She asked me, do you trust Marcus Kane? And I had to say, I don't know, because for 4 days I had no idea where you were, what you were doing, whether the reports I was giving Churchill and Roosevelt had any connection to reality. He opened a folder on his desk, pulled out a photograph, slid it across to Kane. It was an aerial reconnaissance photo. Third Army columns on the road to Chartres, taken yesterday based on the date stamp. You could see the tanks, the trucks, the long snake of American armor stretching for miles. The Germans knew where you were before I did, Stone said. We intercepted their radio traffic. They were tracking your movements, reporting your positions, calling you Der Geist because they couldn't predict you. Stone's voice was hollow, while my own intelligence officers were guessing based on 4-day-old information. Kane looked at the photograph, saw his army reduced to grainy black and white images on paper. If I can't trust your position reports, Stone said quietly, how can I keep you in command? How can I coordinate Allied operations when I don't know where an entire American army is operating? How can I tell Montgomery that American forces are reliable when you've just proven we're not? The question wasn't rhetorical. Stone genuinely wanted an answer. Kane had none, because Stone was right about all of it. The silence extended. Stone picked up a pen, set it down, picked it up again. The small, nervous gestures of a man struggling with a decision he didn't want to make but knew he had to. There's something I need to tell you, Stone said finally. Something I've never told anyone. Kane waited. When Overlord was being planned, when we were deciding who would command what, there was a debate about Third Army. Some people wanted Hodges, others wanted Devers. The British wanted someone more tractable, someone who wouldn't cause problems. Stone's fingers drummed once on the desk, stopped. I fought for you, argued with Eisenhower that Marcus Kane was the only man who could do what needed to be done for the breakout, that you had the instinct, the aggression, the tactical brilliance we'd need. He looked up, and Eisenhower asked me one question. Can you control him? Can you keep him from doing something reckless that endangers the entire operation? Kane's throat went dry. I told him yes, Stone said quietly. I promised I could manage you, that I understood how you think, that our friendship would give me the leverage to keep you in check when necessary, that you would listen to me even when you wouldn't listen to anyone else. He gestured at the reconnaissance photo. And now I'm sitting here 4 days after you went completely off the reservation, wondering if I lied. To Eisenhower, to Churchill, to myself, wondering if I promised something I could never deliver. The words landed like physical blows. Kane had never considered this, had never thought about the promises Stone had made to get him this command, had never realized his actions might reflect on Stone personally. I'm sorry, Kane said. I didn't know. You shouldn't have had to know. Stone's voice was firm again. You should have trusted that if I'd said no to your plan, it was for good reason, that I was seeing angles you weren't, that coalition warfare requires compromises that tactical brilliance can't solve. He stood, walked to the window again. But here's the thing, Marcus. The thing that's kept me awake for 4 nights. Stone turned. His face was drawn, older than Kane had ever seen it. If you had asked me for permission to drive east instead of south, I would have said no. Kane blinked. I would have told you to follow the plan, secure Brittany, consolidate our gains. I would have given you every rational argument for caution, for following procedure, for not taking unnecessary risks. Stone's voice was steady, but something underneath it was breaking, and thousands more men would have died because of it. The admission hung in the air like smoke. So I'm faced with a choice, Stone continued. Relieve the general who disobeyed orders but saved lives, or keep him in command and admit that sometimes the chain of command gets it wrong, that sometimes regulations and procedures and proper authorization are slower than opportunity, that sometimes friendship and trust matter less than results. He walked back to his desk, sat down heavily. I'm not sure which is worse for this army, for this alliance, for the war. The knock on the door interrupted them. Not now, Stone called. The door opened anyway. A young major stood in the doorway, pale-faced and trembling slightly. His uniform was crisp, but his eyes were red, like he'd been crying or wanted to cry and was fighting it. Sir, I apologize for the interruption, but I said not now. Sir, it's urgent. The major's voice wavered. From Third Army's forward elements, they've discovered something. Stone's expression darkened. What? The major hesitated, looked at Kane, back to Stone, swallowed hard. A camp, Sir Ordruff. They're calling it a concentration camp. The Germans, Sir, you need to see the photographs. He laid a manila envelope on the desk with hands that shook. Stone stared at it for a long moment, like he knew that opening it would change something fundamental, that whatever was inside would shift the ground beneath this entire conversation. Then he opened it slowly, pulled out a series of black and white photographs, looked at the first one. His face went white. All the color drained out of it like someone had opened a valve and let his blood run out onto the floor. Kane stood, walked around the desk, looked over Stone's shoulder. The photograph showed things that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Bodies stacked like cordwood outside a long building. Not fresh bodies, old bodies. Skeletal, stripped of everything that made them human except bones and paper-thin skin. Survivors staring at the camera with eyes that had seen hell and couldn't look away from it. Striped uniforms, shaved heads, ribs visible through cloth, guard towers, barbed wire, cremation ovens with bones still inside, the carefully organized infrastructure of mechanized death, Ordruff concentration camp, one of hundreds. Stone set down the photographs with hands that shook slightly. Dear God, the major's voice was unsteady. Sir General Kane's forward elements liberated the camp 2 hours ago. There were the survivors. There aren't many, maybe 100, maybe less. The ones who can speak are asking for food, medical attention. They say there are other camps, bigger camps. He couldn't continue, couldn't find words for what the photograph showed. Kane picked up one of the photographs, forced himself to look at every detail, to memorize it, to sear it into his memory so he would never forget why they were fighting. This was why. How many camps, he asked quietly. The major swallowed. Sir, based on intelligence intercepts and prisoner interrogations, we estimate hundreds scattered across occupied territory. Poland, Germany, Austria, some larger than Ordruff, much larger. Tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands. He stopped, because the numbers didn't matter. Any number was too many. Stone stood abruptly, walked to the window, stood there with his back to the room's shoulders, rigid hands clenched behind his back. When he spoke, his voice was hollow. Leave us. The major fled. Kane and Stone stood in silence. The photographs remained on the desk between them. Evidence of something so monstrous that it made their argument about operational authority seem trivial, small, meaningless. Every day we delay, Kane said quietly, is another day those camps operate. Stone didn't turn around. I know. Every hour we spend following procedures while Germans retreat to new defensive lines is another hour those camps kill people. Men, women, children. I know. Max, Kane's voice was rough, raw. I didn't just do this for tactical advantage. I didn't do it for glory or to prove I was smarter than the operational planners. I did it because I couldn't stop. Because stopping meant letting them escape, letting them consolidate, letting them continue that. He gestured at the photographs, even though Stone couldn't see him. Stone turned slowly. His eyes were red. Not from crying, from something worse. From seeing something that couldn't be unseen. From understanding something that couldn't be unknown. "You should have told me," Stone said. "Would you have authorized it?" "I don't know, maybe, maybe not." Stone came back to his desk. Looked at the photographs again. Looked away. "But you should have given me the chance to make that decision. Should have trusted me enough to share the intelligence about Ludic. Should have asked instead of assumed. There wasn't time. There's always time for the chain of command, Marcus. That's what holds armies together. That's what prevents chaos. That's what separates us from," he gestured at the photographs, "from them." Stone gathered the photographs carefully, put them back in the envelope, sealed it like he could contain the horror by containing the images. "You were right about the tactical situation," Stone said. His voice was firmer now, controlled again. "Right about the German collapse. Right about the opportunity. Right about Lutic." He paused. "But you were wrong about this. About going silent. About making me choose between relieving my best field commander and maintaining the integrity of the command structure. About forcing me to either look incompetent to Churchill and Roosevelt or disloyal to you." Kane said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Stone was right. "You'll retain your command," Stone said. Kane felt something release in his chest. Air he hadn't realized he was holding. Hope he'd been too afraid to acknowledge. "But this is the last time," Stone continued. "The absolute last time. From this moment forward, you will report your position every 12 hours. No exceptions, no delays, no tactical situations that prevent communication." "Yes, sir." "Any deviation from assigned objectives will be cleared through this headquarters before execution. Not after. Before. You will ask permission, not forgiveness." "Yes, sir." Stone stood, walked around the desk, stopped directly in front of Kane. They were the same height, had been since West Point, eye to eye. "I'm not doing this because you were right," Stone said. "I'm doing this because you're too valuable to lose. Because this army needs you. Because those boys out there need someone who'll fight like hell to bring them home. Someone who sees opportunities that more cautious men miss." He extended his hand. Kane shook it. Stone's grip was firm, hard, like he was holding on to something he was afraid of losing. "But Marcus, hear me clearly, one more time. One more unauthorized operation, one more radio silence, one more decision to go rogue and ask forgiveness later." Stone's grip tightened until Kane's bones ached. "And I will relieve you so fast your head will spin. I will send you home in disgrace. I will make sure you never command anything larger than a traffic detail for the rest of your life. Do you understand?" "I understand." "Do you?" Stone released his hand. "Because I'm not sure you do. I'm not sure you understand that this isn't just about you and your tactical brilliance. It's about every other commander who might decide that the rules don't apply to them either. It's about maintaining an army that functions as a cohesive whole, not as a collection of individual prima donnas doing whatever they think is best." Kane met his eyes. "I understand, and I give you my word, it won't happen again." Stone studied him for a long moment, searching for something, sincerity, conviction, evidence that this time the promise would hold. Finally, he nodded. "Good. Get back to France. Third Army has a war to win." Kane saluted, turned to leave. "Marcus," he stopped, hand on the doorknob. Stone's voice was softer now, sadder. "I'm glad you were right, about Ludic, about the German collapse, about all of it. Thank you. But next time you want to save the world," Stone paused, "tell me first. Even if you think I'll say no. Especially if you think I'll say no. Because maybe I need to hear why I'm wrong." Kane smiled slightly. "Yes, sir." Kane walked out of the office through the corridor filled with watching eyes and whispered conversations out into the gray English morning. He'd kept his command. Barely, by the thinnest margin between vindication and disaster. The leash was shorter now. The freedom he'd enjoyed during those 4 glorious days was gone. From this moment forward, every move would be watched, every report scrutinized, every decision measured against the promise he'd just made. But he was still in command, still leading Third Army, still moving east toward victory. The staff car waited. "Take me to the airfield," Kane said. As they drove through Portsmouth, past the harbor where ships prepared for the next convoy to France, past the barracks where soldiers trained for battles they might not survive, past all the machinery of modern war. Kane thought about the photographs in Stone's office. The camps, the bodies, the carefully organized infrastructure of death. He pulled out his notepad, wrote a message in his careful script. To Colonel Donovan, Third Army is clear to continue operations. Maintain current tempo. Report positions every 12 hours without fail. Authorization received for continued advance eastward. New intelligence confirms Operation Lutich will proceed as predicted. Continue current positioning. He paused, added one more line. Third Army forward elements have liberated Ordrov concentration camp. Photographs being sent separately. This is why we fight. This is why we cannot slow down. Every hour we waste is another hour those camps remain in operation. Move fast, end this. He tore out the page, folded it, put it in his pocket. The C-47 was waiting when he arrived. Same aircraft, same crew. Different world than when he'd left France 8 hours ago. Kane climbed aboard, settled into his seat, watched England fall away beneath him. Ahead, France waited. And Third Army. And the war that would end one way or another because a 62-year-old general had decided that some opportunities were worth any price. Even his career. Even his friendship with the man who'd been his brother for 35 years. Even the razor-thin margin between vindication and disaster that he'd been walking for 4 days. The margin was thinner now, the ground beneath his feet more treacherous. But he was still walking, still moving, still refusing to stop until it was done. Kane pulled out Margaret's letter. Read it one more time. Come home safe. He would try, but first he had a war to win, and camps to liberate, and promises to keep. Kane closed his eyes, and for the first time since this began, he slept without dreaming. The counteroffensive began at dawn on August 7, 1944. 4 panzer divisions, 50,000 men, 800 tanks. The entire remaining armored strength of the Wehrmacht in France concentrated at a single point near Mortain, driving west with orders to cut the American breakout at its base and push Third Army back to the sea. Operation Lüttich. The German High Command had planned it for weeks, coordinated it carefully, positioned their forces with precision. They knew exactly where the Americans were supposed to be, knew exactly which roads the relief columns would use, knew exactly how to exploit the gap in Allied lines. Everything was perfect. Except for one problem, the Americans weren't where they were supposed to be. Oberst Heinrich Weber stood in his command post 3 miles east of Mortain and listened to the radio reports with a growing sense of doom that felt like drowning in cold water. The attack had started well, initial penetrations achieved, American forward positions overrun. For 2 hours, 2 glorious hours, it looked like the plan might actually work. Like Germany might actually push the Allies back to the sea. Like the war might continue for months or years instead of ending in catastrophic defeat. Then the reports changed. Contact with American armor. Heavy concentration. Grid reference. Weber checked the reference on his map. His stomach turned to ice. The Americans were 40 miles behind where any American armor should be. Behind the attacking German columns. Between the panzer divisions and their supply dumps. Between the attack and any hope of success. Supply column under attack, American fighter bombers. Heavy casualties. The Jabos. The American P-47s that owned the daylight sky. That turned German convoys into burning wreckage. That made movement in daytime a death sentence. Request immediate reinforcement at... But there were no reinforcements. Everything had been committed to Lüttich. Everything was already bleeding. Everything was already dying in a battle that had been lost before it began. By noon, Weber knew Lüttich wasn't going to work. It had never been going to work. Because 4 days ago, Marcus Kane had positioned his army exactly where it needed to be to strangle this offensive in its cradle. Herr Oberst. His aide's face was gray. Young Hoffman looked like he'd aged a decade in 6 hours. Field Marshal von Kluge is asking for status report. Weber almost laughed. Status? The status was that the last offensive capability of the Wehrmacht in France was being systematically destroyed. That every minute they continued this attack just fed more men into American guns. That the war was lost, and everyone knew it, but nobody wanted to say it. Tell the Field Marshal. Weber paused. What was there to tell? What words existed for this? Tell him Der Geist was waiting for us. Hoffman blinked. Sir, Kane, the American general, he knew. Somehow he knew where we'd attack and when. Weber looked at his maps, now obsolete, now nothing but expensive paper covered in lies. He positioned his forces to cut our supply lines before we even launched. We're not fighting Americans who are surprised. We're fighting Americans who have been waiting for us. Weber walked to the window. Outside, he could see smoke rising in the distance. German tanks burning. German soldiers dying. The sound of American artillery getting closer. Always closer. What should I tell the field marshal? Hoffman asked quietly. Weber was quiet for a long moment. Tell him we're doing our duty, and that our duty is going to get us killed. By August 13th, Operation Lüttich had collapsed completely. By August 19th, the Falaise pocket had closed. 50,000 German soldiers trapped, killed, captured. An entire army destroyed in 12 days of fighting that vindicated everything Kane had risked. Der Geist had won. The reports flooded into SHAEF headquarters like water through a broken dam. Casualty figures, prisoner counts, abandoned equipment tallies. The numbers told a story of German defeat so comprehensive that it changed the entire strategic picture of the war. Maxwell Stone read them in his office and felt the weight of his decision shift from burden to vindication. Kane had been right about everything, the advance, the positioning, the risk, the gamble, all of it right. Sir, his aide knocked. General Bradley on the line? Stone picked up the phone. Omar. Bradley's voice was careful, controlled. Max, I need to ask you something. What? Are we going to have this conversation with Kane every time he decides operational plans or suggestions rather than orders? Stone was quiet for a moment. No, what down? You're sure about that? I'm sure that I had a very clear conversation with General Kane. He understands the boundaries now. He understands what happens if he crosses them again. Does he? Bradley didn't sound convinced. Because from where I'm sitting, we just rewarded his insubordination with complete vindication. He was right about everything. The German collapse, Lüttich, the positioning, everything. So what's to stop him from doing it again? Stone looked out his window at the gray English sky, at the ships in the harbor, at the machinery of war that ground on whether generals followed rules or not. Me too him, Stone said quietly. I'm what stops him, because next time I will relieve him, and he knows it. After the call ended, Stone sat alone in his office for a long time. He thought about Kane, about their conversation, about the photographs from Ohrdruf that had shifted everything, about the terrible arithmetic of war that measured success in lives saved versus regulations violated. He pulled out a piece of paper, started writing. Marcus, you were right about everything. You saved thousands of lives by doing exactly what I would have forbidden if you'd asked permission. I'm not sure what that says about you. I'm less sure what it says about me. He stopped, crossed it out, started again. Marcus, 35 years. That's how long I've known you. 35 years of watching you be brilliant and difficult and necessary. He stopped again, stared at the half-written letter. What was he trying to say? That Kane's disobedience had been justified, that friendship mattered more than discipline, that sometimes the system was wrong and individual judgment was right. He couldn't say any of that. Not officially, not in writing. Stone folded the letter, put it in his desk drawer. Not yet. Someday. When there was time. When the war was over. When he could find the right words. The months that followed became a blur of advance and consolidation. September turned to October, October to November, November to December. Third Army drove east, across France, into Belgium, toward the German border. And every 12 hours, like clockwork, Kane filed position reports, exact coordinates, current strength, anticipated movements. Every detail SHAEF requested delivered with mechanical precision. The leash was shorter now, but Kane was still moving. By December 1944, Third Army had reached the German border. By March 1945, they'd crossed the Rhine. By April, they were deep in Germany, liberating more camps, finding more evidence of the mechanized horror that had made Ohrdruf seem small by comparison. On May 7, 1945, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Kane was in Czechoslovakia when the news came. Third Army had linked up with Soviet forces. The fighting had stopped. The shooting had ended. 3 million American soldiers could finally go home. He stood in a town square and watched his men celebrate. They were laughing, crying, hugging each other, firing their weapons into the air in violation of every regulation ever written. He let them. Some rules were made to be broken, especially today. We did it, sir, Donovan said, finding him at the edge of the celebration. We actually did it. They did it, Kane corrected. We just pointed them in the right direction. Marcus, Donovan used his first name, something he rarely did. You need to hear this. You saved lives. The advance through France, the positioning for Lüttich, all of it. You made the difference. Kane was quiet for a moment. The question isn't what I did, Everett. It's what it can. What do you mean? My friendship with Stone, the easy communication we used to have, the trust. Kane shook his head. We won the war, but I'm not sure we survived it. Not as friends. Donovan didn't argue, because he'd seen it too. The subtle shift in how Stone addressed Kane in communications. The formality where there used to be warmth. The professional distance that hadn't existed before Portsmouth. Something had broken that couldn't be fixed. Kane returned to the United States in June 1945. There were parades, speeches, ceremonies. Margaret waiting at the dock with tears streaming down her face. Home, safety, the promise of peace after 3 years of war. But by November, the restlessness found him again. Marcus, no, Margaret said when he told her about the assignment to Germany, occupation duty, helping stabilize the peace. You've done enough. We've given enough. It's temporary. 6 months, maybe a year. You said that in 1940. I mean it this time. She looked at him with eyes that had buried one Kane and refused to bury another. Do you, or are you running from something? What would I be running from? Peace. A life where nobody's shooting at you and you don't have to make decisions that get people killed. A life where you're just Marcus Kane, not General Kane, not der Geist. Her voice broke. A life with me. Kane didn't answer because she was right. He didn't know how to be just Marcus Kane anymore. So he went back to Germany, back to the ruins, back to the familiar weight of command and the terrible clarity of purpose that came with it. And on December 9th, 1945, on a cold afternoon in Mannheim, his war finally caught up with him. The truck came around the corner too fast. Kane never saw it, was reading reports in the back of the staff car, half listening to his aide discuss the day's schedule, thinking about Margaret, about whether he should have stayed home, about whether she'd been right. Then metal shrieked against metal, glass shattered. The world tumbled sideways in a confusion of pain and noise and the coppery taste of blood. When the spinning stopped, Kane couldn't move his legs, couldn't feel them. Just numbness spreading up from his waist like ice water, filling a sinking ship. A face appeared above him. Young, terrified. A medic. Sir, don't move. Help is coming. You're going to be fine. But Kane knew 62-year-old men with broken backs didn't walk away. The call reached Stone in Washington at 300 hours. Stone. Sir, this is Colonel Matthews, Occupation Headquarters, Germany. I'm calling about General Kane. Stone's world stopped. What happened? Vehicle accident, sir, in Mannheim. He's alive, but, sir, his spine is fractured. He's paralyzed from the waist down. The doctors say... Matthews didn't need to finish. Stone sat in the darkness and felt something break inside himself that would never heal. I'm flying out immediately, Stone said. Tell him I'm coming. But he wasn't sure Kane would last long enough to hear it. 12 days. That's how long it took Marcus Kane to die. 12 days of lying in a hospital bed in Heidelberg, unable to move, slowly drowning as his body shut down system by system. Pneumonia setting in, infection spreading. The inevitable cascade of failures that came when a human body stopped being able to fight. Margaret flew from the United States, sat beside him, held his hand, watched her husband fade. Stone arrived on December 20th, 24 hours before the end. Kane was unconscious by then. Morphine and infection in the slow failure of everything that had kept him alive through 62 years and 2 world wars. Stone stood beside the bed and looked at his old friend. The ivory-handled revolvers sat on the bedside table, cleaned, polished, waiting for hands that would never hold them again. I'm sorry, Stone said quietly to the unconscious man. I'm sorry I was angry in Portsmouth. Sorry I threatened you. Sorry I let regulations come between us, when what mattered was that you were trying to save lives. Kane didn't respond, couldn't respond. You were right, Stone continued. His voice was breaking, about everything. Luttich, the advance, the camps. You saved thousands of lives. You were the best field commander this army has ever produced. He paused, swallowed hard. And I never told you that when you could hear it. Margaret sat on the other side of the bed. Her face was composed. 63 years old, a lifetime of being a military wife, of containing grief in front of others. He knew, she said quietly. He knew you respected him. But did he know what he meant to me? Stone's voice cracked. Did he know that every argument made me better, that I needed him to challenge me, that I was a better commander because he refused to accept my decisions without question? Margaret didn't answer. They both knew he didn't. Stone had spent 35 years being Kane's superior, his commander, his check and balance. But he'd never been his friend in the way that mattered most. Never lowered the walls completely. Never said the words. And now the moment had passed. Kane died at 0400 hours on December 21st, 1945. The winter solstice, the longest night of the year. Stone was there when it happened, watched the monitors flatline, heard the doctors call the time, felt the world become smaller and colder and emptier. He walked out of the hospital into the German morning and cried for the first time since the telegram about his brother's death in the Pacific. The funeral was held at Arlington National Cemetery on a gray January afternoon in 1946. Full military honors, flag-draped casket, 21-gun salute, taps played by a bugler whose notes hung in the cold air like ghosts. Stone stood throughout the ceremony, back straight, face expressionless, hands at his sides, the perfect image of military bearing. Inside, he was collapsing. The crowd was enormous, thousands, generals and politicians and veterans and soldiers who'd served under Kane. They filled the hillside with their grief and memories. Sergeant Hank Morrison placed a wreath at the grave, flowers from Le Mans, from the French people who remembered Der Geist. "He knew my name," Morrison said quietly, "made me feel like I mattered." Stone heard it, filed it away. Another piece of Marcus Kane he'd never fully understood. The ceremony ended, the grave filled, the crowd dispersed. Stone remained. When everyone else had gone, when the sun was setting and the cemetery was empty, he reached into his coat, pulled out an envelope. The letter he'd started in August 19 finished and rewritten a dozen times. Never sent. He opened it, read it one final time. "Marcus, it was jealous of you, jealous of your talent, your certainty, your ability to see opportunities I missed. But more than jealous, I was grateful. You made me a better commander, a better man, and I never told you. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry I thought there would be time, your friend Max." Stone knelt down, placed the letter on the cold earth, took out his lighter, set it on fire. Watched the words curl and blacken and turn to ash. "I'm sorry, Marcus," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." 19 years later, December 1964, Maxwell Stone was 74 years old, retired, living quietly with Catherine in Virginia. But once a year on the anniversary of Kane's death, he drove to Arlington, always alone, always carrying a letter. The same letter, rewritten, the same words, the same apology. He stood before the white marble headstone. Marcus Kane, General, United States Army, 1882-1945, Der Geist. Someone had added the nickname. Stone suspected Morrison, who visited regularly. Stone knelt. His knees protested. Made everything harder. He placed this year's letter on the grave. "I'm still here," he said quietly, "still thinking about August 1944, still wondering what would have happened if I'd trusted you more, if I'd told you what you meant to me." The cemetery was quiet except for wind in the trees. You'd hate how slow everything moves now. All committees, all consensus. Nobody makes decisions the way you did. He smiled sadly. "I miss that. Miss arguing with you. Miss knowing that somewhere Marcus Kane was making someone's life difficult because he saw something they didn't." The smile faded. "I wish I'd told you when it mattered. What you meant to me, what you meant to this country, what you meant to every soldier who came home because you moved too fast for the enemy to kill them." He stood slowly, looked at the letter. "You were right about everything," he said, "and I should have said so when you could hear it." Stone walked to his car, left the letter for the wind to take. Maxwell Stone died in 1969. Heart attack, quick, the kind soldiers pray for. They buried him at Arlington, 50 feet from Kane, close enough to see one grave from the other. In his will, Stone left instructions. "Bury me near Marcus Kane. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him he was right." Morrison attended Stone's funeral. 66 years old now, successful, but he still remembered. After the ceremony, he stood between the two graves, thought about leadership, about tension and partnership, about how the people who drive us crazy are often the people we need most, about how we should tell them so, before the moment passes. The two graves sit in the Virginia hillside facing east. Visitors come, salute, move on. But sometimes in quiet moments, the wind moves through the grass between the headstones. And if you listen carefully, you might hear conversation. Two old soldiers, two old friends, finally saying what should have been said decades earlier. Marcus Kane disappeared an entire army for 4 days and changed history. But the real disappearance was quieter. The disappearance of words never spoken, gratitude never expressed, friendship never acknowledged, until silence was all that remained. Don't wait. Don't assume there's time. Tell the people who matter what they mean to you. Tell them today. Tell them now, before you're standing at a grave with a letter written too late apologizing to silence for words you should have spoken when they could still be heard. That's the lesson of Marcus Kane and Maxwell Stone. Not about war or strategy or victory, about the most important words in any language. The ones we hold back until the moment passes, the ones that matter most.